Hello, I'm Soikan, welcome back to my second channel video all about underground trains, because let me share a secret with all of you. One of the things I'm really passionate about, but I don't like to admit, is metro systems all around the world, and particularly metro systems all around Europe, which I know sounds absurd on the surface. Like, what is there to be interested about when it comes to underground trains? It's literally just a thing you get on, it takes you to another place. They exist in some cities, they don't exist in others. What is there to care about beyond that? But the truth is, the metro system is a fairly new concept to humanity, you know? They've all been developed over the last 130 years, and every single metro has its own little tale of when it was developed in that 130-year span. Because they've all happened slowly over that time, they all have different tales of when the city finally got serious about investing in its transport. When it finally decided, okay, we need to get people around, and it's, you know, we're at the point where we're willing to dig huge tunnels below the ground to do so. And yeah, in today's video, I wanted to talk about metros because every single metro has a slightly different story, and particularly if you ever do travel around Europe, you're gonna have to go on metros, and you're gonna have to use them. So there's some interesting, mildly unique stories about each of them that maybe you'll appreciate. So yeah, one thing before we start, here is a map of every country around the world which has a metro in green and which doesn't in white. You can see most of the density is in Europe, and in fact if we go specifically to a Europe only map where every country that has a metro system is white and everyone that doesn't is green, you can see how the vast majority of European countries do in fact have a metro, and the ones that don't, again, it's like former Yugoslavia, Albania, Slovakia, Moldova, the Baltics, Ireland, Iceland, Malta, Cyprus, and of course the micro countries. But when you look at all of that and you're like, okay then, so clearly something, I don't know, communism and islands seems to be the common theme there. But like when you try and link it together, it's like, well, I mean, there's actually a few other factors that also just mean that every other country built them for some reason. And again, when you look at a map of every single one of them, you can start to realize that like, oh, this lines up with population bananas. If you don't know population bananas, I sound ridiculous every time this comes up, but in Europe, there is 3 big bananas where most people are located. They look like this, and as you look along the bananas, you're like, oh yeah, there's London, there's Lille, Brussels, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Frankfurt, Cologne, etc, 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 and you start to realize that like, oh yeah, all of these start to make sense. Like, they're very densely there, very dense there. Like, Italy has a bunch of metros, counter to what you might assume, and yeah, you start to realize that there's a lot of different unique stories about that. So let's dive one by one into some of these, because I find it kind of fascinating. So let's start with the oldest subway system anywhere in Europe. Oh yeah, there's a lot of terms for them, but we'll dive into that as we go through it, because the oldest metro anywhere in the world is the London Underground. This was built less than 130 years ago now, but it is still the very oldest. It was built in London, one of the biggest cities in the world at the time and today. And the interesting thing about the London Underground is you probably know enough about it. I could talk about it all video, so I'm going to try and be really quick here. One, it's one of the more iconic looking metros anywhere around the world, which is why it comes up in so many movies and such. Two is the fact that it started all the way back then with steam trains, which meant there was horrific issues of trying to ventilate it, and it was a big issue for everyone involved, but they still persevered, and again, they've been extending the network ever since. Now it's one of the biggest in the world. And 3 is the fact that, yeah, I think 3 was actually the fact that it's now one of the biggest in the world. So there you go, there's 3 points about it. But we'll move on very quickly to the second and third metros in the world, which were also developed in Europe. So there's a little bit of contention as to whether it was the Budapest Metro in Hungary, or whether it's the Glasgow Subway in Scotland, United Kingdom. Again, there's a little bit of contention. It looks mostly like Budapest came first, but it's not actually 100% settled as far as I can tell based on my research. But if we assume that Budapest was second and Glasgow was the third, it means that 2 of the first 3 metros in the world were built in the same country, the United Kingdom. And the interesting thing about the Glasgow Subway, having ridden on it, and I'm sure you know something about it, is the fact that it is one of the, without being too condescending, cutest metros anywhere in the world. So unlike London's metro, which grew and grew and grew and grew, the Glasgow Subway kind of just stayed in its same form. It shut down for a few years and then came back, and yeah, there's been some development, but it's kind of stayed in the exact same form, which means it has the same form factor it did back then. This is the size of a person, that's the size of the train. You know, you have to like kind of crouch and bend to fit inside it, which is kind of a weird thing. And the other thing is that there is one line of the Glasgow Subway, even to this day. It looks like this, as you can see. The beautiful thing about having a ring loop, because again, I stayed in Glasgow for a bit. At one point, I was like going from Kelvin Bridge to, I want to say, West Street. It made sense to go on the outer circle, to go that way around. I got on the wrong side, and I was like, oh, I go 8 stations now as opposed to 6. whatever, that's fine. And that's the beauty of the Glasgow Subway. You can never go the wrong way. You can just go the slightly less right way to where you want to go. So yeah, with that said, that is Glasgow Subway in any circle line around the world. And yeah, it's just worth noting that it's the cutest subway, and if you're ever in Glasgow, it's not actually the most useful, but it is one that's like an iconic one to see, not because it's useful, but because it's interesting. Although it is also useful to some people, which is worth noting and keeping that in mind. So yeah, with that said, that's two examples of a thing, and you might have noticed how, despite being in the same country, the word for the London Underground, or the Tube, as Londoners generally call it, versus Glasgow and the Subway, they're different words. And then when you go to Paris and the Paris Metro, that's a different word too. When you go to New York, it's the Subway again. When you go to LA, they use their own set of terms, and again, in Chicago, it's the Loop, right? So, oh no, it's called, I actually forget the name for it. It's called like the SkyTrain or something, but, the L, that's what it is. There you go. Soy Cat on the spot, remembering Chicago vocabulary. But no, basically, every single country has their own word for it, and I find this to be an interesting thing, not just because, like, okay, so the general international standard word is metro, but then every country kind of emits their own, but also because some languages kind of then do it their own way with their own logos. So if you go to any German-speaking country, for instance, so Germany, Austria, Northern Switzerland, Liechtenstein doesn't have a metro either, but, you know, if you go to Germany, Austria, or Switzerland, they'll generally call their metros the U-Bahn. So, yeah, the U-Bahn is an interesting concept. You can see it if we go to Vienna, for instance, which is a German-speaking city with a U-Bahn network. They have something called U-Bahns, which means when you look on a map, you'll see these. This is Museums Quartier, which is Karlsplatz. You can see it's like, okay, it's a U-Bahn network, and you can see when you click on any of them, that this is what their network looks like. However, interesting enough is the point that the fact that they call them U-Bahns, and that's just the accepted word for underground train, not only in these countries, but also outside the world, and also when you're referring to the underground in their countries. It's a weird kind of convergence of the word outside the language, but yeah, the U-Bahn, which is what they call it in, again, Germany, Austria, and just generally around the world, is what you call these types of trains, but it means underground train. And I find that to be interesting as like, so they, we've got like metro, underground, subway, and underground train. That makes sense. But my favorite one is the fact that, so Scandinavian languages are quite related to German. That again, they separated a long time ago, but there's some connection. But all of the networks in Copenhagen, Oslo, and Stockholm, in Scandinavian countries, all use something which is called the T-Bane as their thing. So T-Bane, again, I'm horrific at the pronunciation, but their underground trains are called T-trains because it means tunnel train. And in my opinion, so if Glasgow Subway has the cutest actual trains in the world, Tunnelbana is one of the cutest names for a train network around the world. And Oslo's subway network is fascinating for this reason right here. This is what the T-Bana looks like, or the map looks like. As you can see, it's like, okay, so they've got a fairly consistent format that is very reminiscent of S-trains. Again, whole video on S-trains sometime, but no, it's very reminiscent of that, where there's just one central section where every single train on the network calls on. As you can see, it's like literally, 1, 2, 3, 4, nice naming system, by the way, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they all go along this central section right here, which I want to say has 24 trains an hour going along it. It's very, very rapid if you're going from any station to any other one here. Super, super fast, because they're all the urban core, whereas these are all very far out stations. But the other interesting thing is it's the only metro network anywhere around the world, as far as I'm aware, that has a double loop system involved. So if you want to go from Sognsvann to Vestli without leaving your train, what you do is you go around, you go through the central core, you go back round over to here, where the 4 goes, and then you go around again before you end up at your destination. Again, it is a double loop network. Usually, most countries just either have a separate branch, or they, or what they do is they just run more trains that go from, let's say Berg to Hassel or something. But no, in the case of this one, they run 2 loops, and the reason for that is because of just how congested this tunnel is, because it's where pretty much most of the demand comes from. Most of the demand goes through this one tunnel, and yeah, it's a fascinating metro network for that reason. Map for that reason. It's also quite interesting because if we show you the entire network, it looks a bit weird again on Google Maps compared to that. It's like, okay, so you can see very thick lines showing where most of the stuff is. But let me tell you about one of my favorite places in Oslo. It's something called Oslo Winter Park. It's super, super close to the city for like an actual skiing place. But 2, at the exact same station you would otherwise get off for the Winter Park, there is the very end of the line. You can get off and you can rent a sled pretty much next to the metro station. And there's a huge hill here. You can vaguely tell by the lines on Google Maps, but it takes you to roughly over here, which means you can actually, again, they set it up after the metro, knowing this would work. You can, again, rent a sled up here, ride it all the way down the mountain, and then it's timed just well enough so when you get to the bottom of the mountain, you have about a 5-minute wait, then a train comes along, you get on the train, bring it to the top, and you can go all the way back round. So even though this is a metro system, it's one of the most beautiful metros in the world. It goes up a mountain, definitely not underground, because most metros don't go mostly underground. This one is no exception. But also, you can ride a sled down it, and that is just one of my favorite things about any metro anywhere in the world. Because how often is it that you're like, let's get off at the metro stop, slide back down to the previous one, and then get back here. Again, just a really cool thing to do, and one of the reasons I love Oslo. There's a lot of reasons not, and most of that's price, but there's a lot of reasons to love Oslo as well. So, speaking of Scandinavian countries, let's talk about the T-Bane network in T-Bane. Again, I'm very sorry. Can we just call it T-Bane? And you'd be like, I guess that is how you would say it in English, and then we can move on? No, we can't do that? Okay, so let's talk about the Stockholm network, because Stockholm is, again, it's another Scandinavian country. Who would have figured? It only has 3 lines for their network. You can see they look like this. They're very colourful, and the thing that there is to love about Sweden, and it's only, because if you look on the map, again, you can see how there's only one underground system in all of Sweden. It's Stockholm's Metro. So the Stockholm Metro has a couple of things to love about it. The first one is the fact that it has artwork all along the station. So the art looks something like this. Every station has its own unique piece of art. And I'm so torn about this. Is this beauty of like, oh my god, you can see like you look around and you're just like, every station is beautiful. When you're walking through it, you're like, yeah, this is nice. They spent a lot of money on art. Is that a waste of public money to make art? Or is it like, yeah, if everyone's on the metro anyway, might as well have a better time in the morning? I don't know for sure. I'm like conflicted internally about that. And the second thing that I found kind of crazy about it, because I actually, I'll call it live, but I went to Stockholm for a week, basically to see, like, to live my normal life and to see how that would go or whatever, like, if I could make videos while also being in another country. It was while I was trying to learn Swedish for a bit. Long story about that. But, yeah, basically, I was in Stockholm and I was staying roughly here, somewhere near, there's like it's somewhere roughly here, I want to say. So, if I was staying roughly in this part of Stockholm, near this park over here, and because of that, I had the closest metro station to me was Odenplan. There was also, again, looking at the map, the closest metro was Odenplan. I could also go over the way to here, near a main station, but I was like, okay, that one's slightly closer. And one day, maybe like 6 days into living there, I'm doing this 10-minute walk every day to go from where I am to Odenplan, T-Bahn station. And then, here's the crazy thing, I realized just walking along, because, I'm just doing that, where there should be no metro, I'm just, again, walking along the street, I realized, like, wait a minute, there's a metro stop here. I've been using Google Maps, my metro system, and it's been lying to me because I missed out this entire thing over here. Again, look at the name of this, you're like, oh, Teninska Hoskalan, I don't know where that is on the map. Let's go in. I realized when I went through the entire station that what it is it's this one right here. Again, it's the same name. I'm sorry, my Swedish is just not good enough to remember the metro station I never go to. But basically, even though the station is over here, even though this is the primary part where you usually go down, there is also another entrance all the way over here near the Greek Orthodox Church. And to show you that in terms of distance on a map, it is literally like 5 blocks or something. The distance between metro stations, not just in Sweden, but in a lot of other places with big metro trains, but Sweden has some of the longest of all the ones I've been on, Sweden has some of the longest metros in the world, and because of that, it means there is an absurd distance between one entrance and another one. It's literally like a 5-minute walk to go from there to there, so I thought I had a metro station outside my house, but it was just another one, and yeah, that's why when you see this picture again, you're like, oh, this is from like halfway down the train to the end of the platform, and it still looks long. It's like a 5-minute walk just down the platform in Stockholm, because that many people use the metro, which is a big success in terms of how well it's working, I guess, if nothing else. So yeah, with that said, let's move on to talking about the next set of metros, because if we consult our handy-dandy map again, and you're like, okay then, let's try and talk about countries, about metro. Why don't they have them? So Ireland are actually in the process of making a metro. Dublin deserves a metro. Not deserves, but Dublin needs a metro, really. Other cities don't make too much sense. Maybe one day Cork will be so developed, but Ireland is a city. Ireland is a country with one major city, and then like a second city 1/10 the size, and then not much following that. It's this the story of Ireland. Someone's going to be offended at that, but like that's just how facts and numbers work, but someone's still going to be offended. Sorry, I don't want to offend you. But yeah, so Dublin is building a metro right now. You can see it being built if you live in Dublin. Every time I go past, you see some stuff going on. And eventually, they'll have their own metro. So we can kind of, look at this map again and say, okay, let's cross off Ireland. They're going to get a metro. Looking at the other places on the list, you can be like, okay, so Iceland, Reykjavik particularly, probably could do with a metro. It's not needed by any stretch of the imagination, but like it's about a 2-hour walk from one side of Reykjavik to the other side. There are tourists, so you can maybe find a use for it. And the distance to the airport, which is all the way over there, is Keflavik, is really, really, really huge. Maybe there's some magic you could work out there, but the truth is in Iceland, most of the people live in very dense pockets. So Reykjavik itself is quite dense, but outside the city, you only have to go like an hour, then you're just in random countryside area. It's, they've literally got an airport, by the way, their second one, just over here, that close to the main street. You can walk it in 20 minutes. It's absurd. Because even though there's a couple 100,000 people living in Reykjavik, or so, I want to say, it still means that, like, they're still very densely packed, and it means that a metro, maybe one metro line you could justify, but even then, who knows for sure if that makes sense. And then everywhere else, if you want to go anywhere else in the country, they could just build it above the ground, because the ground isn't so valuable in countries where not all the ground is developed. Also, there's issues of all the other things to do with that. And yeah, that's why Reykjavik probably will build a metro one day, but now is not that day, and now is not the future. And the only other city on this list, so again, looking at this, you're like, okay, so Ireland has one, Iceland maybe should have one soon, but doesn't because it's a very tiny island and, there's lots of issues with that, I guess. So the only other country on this list where I'd say probably it's surprising it doesn't have one is going to be either Riga, Latvia, or Bratislava, Slovakia. So Riga, again, same reasons as Iceland, like could justify it. Don't know why it hasn't come up yet, I guess. Fairly new from the Soviet sphere. But then we look at Slovakia and Bratislava in particular. And this is another example of a city that kind of would make sense as having one, but just kind of doesn't. And if you look at the exact same thing, it's like, oh yeah, well, very dense city. Where would you throw some metro stations and have them be profitable and actually used by people? Probably in not that many places. There aren't, again, dense areas that need to be connected with each other that currently aren't very well connected. There's a whole trolleybus network, there's trams, etc. And that kind of is the thing that fills the gap right now. A metro makes sense if you have no other transport alternatives, but when you already have, again, trams and, I don't know if they do have trams, but they definitely have trolleybuses, which is the buses with the things on the back. Actually, side note, just story time with Toy Cat time. I was once on one of those buses. It's kind of weird being on like an electric bus that's being powered like a tram or a train or something with those cables overhead, but they fell off while we were like turning around a corner, and the bus driver just got off and started whacking it and really like aggressively hitting the bus basically, and then it went back on, and then he got back in the front, and it's like, that's just the attitude you gotta have apparently, you just and I find that to be a fascinating thing, which you wouldn't have if there was an underground system. Maybe one day there'll be one, maybe there won't. But yeah, the common thing about every other country, again, if we ignore the microstates, the islands of Cyprus, Malta, and also, I guess, if we ignore the islands and the microstates, every country is actually former communist, which maybe you want to put a correlation onto, or maybe you just want to say, oh yeah, well the populations are more spread out, they're not as densely packed into one city, because maybe Belgrade, could have a metro, but Sarajevo definitely doesn't need one, like Tirana, who knows for sure. It's that sort of thing that you might find interesting. However, if you do want to try and blame communists, you might want to be like, okay, common thing they all have in common is USSR, former states, or former communist states. There's only two things they've got in common. But the interesting thing is that Russia, the Soviet Union, for its own cities that weren't Baltics, built a lot of metros. So look at Russia alone. It's got 6 just in the western part of Russia, which is all of the parts of Russia with a metro. But still, it's got like 6 metros of itself. Ukraine has 3. All of the countries in the Caucasus, they all have their own metros. So what's the scoop with that? Are they good or are they bad at metros? And I think the interesting thing is when they decided to do it, they would do it. But I wonder like what made them decide to make the decision. Because when we look at, for instance, so again, we go through our maps, you can see the stark difference between nice Norwegian map and Ukrainian metro map. So this is just 3 lines so this is the Kiev Metro, or the Kyiv, you can say it which way you want to say it, but it's the metro there. They have 3 lines, line 1, line 2, line 3. Nice and simple, right? You can see that, I get that. There's 3 interchanges, which means the annoying part about this design is rather than having 1 central station, they have 3 interchange stations. There's only 3 stations in the entire network where you do change, but if you want to go from red to blue, for instance, you change, it's confusing, I guess. It makes sense, because you can always do 1 change, but it means that it's like, actually, I guess I did this, I just realized on the spot why that was such a good idea. I realized in Ukraine why I liked it, and then I realized again just now. You can always go from any one part on the network to any other part with 1 change, because red always intersects with green, blue intersects with red, green with blue, with only 3 interchange stations required. So it keeps things simple in that regard. The metro in Kiev is absurdly cheap to use. Because they had a currency crisis, it works out as about 20 US cents to use it per go right now. Again, absurdly cheap for travel that can be, from like almost one airport to the center or so on and so forth. And they also have some of the steepest escalator. I think it's the steepest escalator, not steepest, the deepest escalator in the world. It's over 100 meters from top to bottom. If you made it like purely vertical, this drop, it would be enough to fit the Statue of Liberty in, and then there'd still be more escalators required. So yeah, long story short, it's really, really steep. I have my own pictures, and every time I look at them, I'm like, oh my god. You go up for so long, because if you're not walking, which it's kind of scary to walk a little bit, you go up it for so long, you start to wonder like, am I tilted, or is the escalator? It looks like you're going at such a constant rate, like diagonally. You're like, maybe the tunnel is straight and I'm just hunched forward slightly. It's something about it like drove me mildly crazy. It's also got a lot of former Soviet stuff. However, they've got some beautiful Ukrainian-looking cars. It's a nice looking thing. And yeah, with that said, I guess if we're mentioning the Kiev Metro, let's also briefly mention the Moscow Metro. So this is a map of the Moscow Metro. It is such an absurdly developed metro. Every single person on there has their resting, let's call it the resting Slav face. So yeah, you're wondering if everyone's just disapproving of you, but it's all right. That's just how you ride metros. They do a good job, in my opinion. But the thing about the Moscow Metro that's interesting is it's the only metro that's ever bag searched me. So some metros have metal detectors when you go in. It's usually a farce. In Thailand, they do it. It's fine. There's the whole, like, you're a white person, go through the metal detector kind of thing. In Moscow, I think I got my bag searched like 3 times. Because every now and then they'd be like, you, through the metal detector. And then they'd be like, all good. And it's like, what are we proving there? Like, did you think that whatever. Anyway, there's a lot of security theatre on the Moscow Metro, and I think it's probably gone up a lot more since they had a big terror incident there. So just watch out if you use the Moscow Metro, which, by the way, good luck using the Moscow Metro. But yeah, it's a whole thing. Also, something I like about this map, look at that perfect circle. Most metro networks that go beyond like 5 lines have something called a circle line or a connection line. This is a mega circle line. So yeah, I think that brings us for the most part. Oh, this is the beautiful art on the Swedish metro, by the way. This is what I wanted to show. This is nice. This is a much better colorized photo. Also, the escalators, they have the Swedish flag on, which is the same colors as the Ukrainian flag. So just saying, conspiracy, 2 metros I liked a lot. Ukraine because it made me feel like I was dying and made me question my sanity, and Sweden because it made me question my sanity and didn't make me feel like I was dying. Basically the same thing there. But yeah, no, I think that kind of brings us to a pretty natural conclusion for metro networks around Europe. Why do some countries have them? Because population density is what makes sense. One of the things that some people always try to advocate for, and you always be like, yeah, actually, I guess that's a good idea, is regional spreading out. Like, okay, so why don't we build metro networks in the tiniest city in, like, I don't know, why don't we get one for like Cornwall? Why is there no Plymouth Metro? Or why is there no metro in Lublin, Poland? Why are we not investing in Eastern Poland? We'd hate to miss out and have to tell our grandkids about that. But the reason that a lot of cities don't have metros is because it doesn't make sense on a population basis level. Like, if you take a city which is, moderately sized but just not big enough, like for instance, I don't know, Trondheim, it's like, yeah, sure. It's a city of some size, but when you've already got other transport methods and there aren't that many people there to kind of justify it, having a metro for Trondheim doesn't make sense. You might say that like, you'll bring jobs there by building a metro, but you won't. The truth is, a metro is when a city has a transportation issue that needs to be solved in this way. It's also kind of like a prestige thing. When Warsaw built its metro, it's like known as like that's pretty high class. They're moving up in the world. It's kind of like a combination of those 2 things. It can show you're ready for business, but if you're a tiny city and everyone knows that you're not anyway, it can be a big waste of money, which does happen sometimes. So, yeah, before we go, there was actually a story I missed that I really want to mention, because Catania is a city, again, learning from this map right here, I learned that Catania had a metro, and I was like, is that true? And it is true. It's the most southernmost metro. You can't really easily see on a map, but Catania, the tiny city in, it's not Sicily, is it? Is this Sicily? I think it's Sicily, but in the little separated bit of Italy, is the southernmost metro in Europe, and in Switzerland, there is no metro in the largest city. So Switzerland has one world-class city, Zurich. It's huge. Over 1 million people live there. And then it has a second pretty large city, Geneva. There's a lot of UN organizations there because it's a big city for all these different reasons. And then, they've got a third biggest city, but their fourth biggest city, Lausanne, actually does have a metro. So despite being significantly smaller, just over 100,000 people live there, Lausanne has a metro. And unlike, because it's the smallest city in the world to have a metro, as I understand it, although Lausanne, even though there's a city called Rennes, which has a metro, which is similarly tinily sized, it's a tiny city in Brittany, in France. It's kind of one of those like BS metros. It has one metro line with like 12 stations. Sorry, not counting that one. Oh, this is Charles de Gaulle Station. What a lovely name for a station. Actually, since at the end of these videos we can kind of mess around a bit more anyway. So I'm going to Paris in a little bit, and long story, just for a couple of days, and I learned that I'm staying near Stalingrad station. Isn't that beautiful? The one Stalingrad in Europe is on the Paris Metro right there. See, that's why metros are interesting. If you just zoned out the last 25 minutes, go to Stalingrad in Paris. It's a cool place. But no, so yeah, if the smallest city with metro in Europe is Lausanne, and it has just over 100,000 people, what's the largest city without metro? And based on my last count, it's Jakarta in Indonesia. This is a city that needs a metro. It needs a metro, but it doesn't have a metro. So, yeah, Jakarta is a huge city. Over 10 million people live in the area. It is just a megalopolis. It's bigger than pretty much any European city. But yeah, despite that, there is no metro. There's trains in some places. There's a rapid bus network now. Let me actually let me show you some of the rapid bus network. It's a whole thing where, like, this is a city that needs some amount of investment. There are huge streets. They're like six lanes wide. Oh, you can see actually here the rapid bus network. So what they did is they're like, okay, instead of building like trains, what if we had one lane of every highway dedicated just to buses, and then they kind of separate it like it's a thing. But I don't know where we are right now. It's like a weird middle part of the river. But it's rough. It is a tough city to get around. It is the toughest city I've ever. So again, when you want to get around Europe, it's easy. There's always some way. You walk, maybe you walk into a metro, maybe you use a bus or something. In this city, if you want to get around, if it's within about 6 hours of 8 a.m. or 5 p.m., which you'll note includes the entire day if it's not midnight outside, you're going to have an exhausting time. And that is why Jakarta needs a metro. But again, certain countries have a harder time investing in one city, and Indonesia is one of those. So there you go. Fun facts of Toycat for you all. Nicest metro around the world that's not in Europe. Gonna give that one to Singapore. You know I need to mention Singapore at least once every 10 Geography of Toycat episodes, or it die, or like at least, or they stop sending the checks over or something. But no, basically, Singapore has one of the best metro networks anywhere in the world. It's a fairly simple one. There's only 5 lines, I want to say, but they cover the entire country. You hear about that? It's a metro network covering the entire country because it's a city-state, so it's kind of cheating, but still, it's a beautiful thing, and it's also super cheap to use. Usually, every fare, like, because you just get a recharge card, it works out the fare for you, and you'd figure like, oh, so you just blindly accept, pay whatever it says, but it's fine. You pay like 60 Singaporean cents per journey, and it's like, oh, I paid 30 USD for that journey. Sorry, 30 US cents for that journey. We're getting too long into the video. Fun facts of Toycat. Could talk about metro systems all day, and maybe one day I will. But for today, I just want to kind of say that, yeah, metros are fascinating. Here's every metro in the world. You can see how very densely populated in Europe, a few in North and South America, a few around the rest of the planet, but it's really just Europe and China where it's mostly caught on, because China's China. I could talk. Yeah, this is your again, in the same way, every 10 episodes we should talk about Singapore and how beautiful and wonderful Singapore is. Let's also remind you that, like, at some point, China will be the world. Oh, it's already like 1 in 5 to 1 in 6 people are Chinese. That's going up. And, my point about population density, look how many metro systems China has. It's like all of Europe, if Europe was one country. But they still have more people. So yeah, there's more Chinese people than even all Europeans and North Americans and, like, Russians, and throw in some South American countries for fun, put together. So yeah, I don't know. With that said, weird note to end the video on, but second channel, don't care. Goodbye. Oh no, check out the Reddit, discuss this video there, and maybe you got an interesting metro fact about your country. I find those interesting. I don't know why. I'm a monster, I know. I just spoke about metros for almost half an hour. Also, email me if you want to. If you got private details for some reason, you can do that. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.